Uncommon is a production by Neuralle, a unique digital agency. Neuralle specialises in content production in the areas that matter most to your content strategy, across podcast production, video production, and social media. If you want to increase your conversion or grow your brand trust, head to neuralle.com to request a callback. That's neuralle.com.
My name's Jordan Michaelides and I'm the host of Uncommon, a show that asks the why on business, current affairs, media and sport. If you like this episode, do of course like and subscribe. This will help the YouTube algorithm work out whether you like this type of content. To find all previous guests, just head to neuralle.com/uncommon. For podcast audio, search Uncommon on all your good podcast apps, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. For social, keep up to date with behind the scenes at uncommon_show. With all that being said, My guest this week, Russel Howcroft, breakfast co-host at 3AW, former CEO at Y&R, author of many books, including Right Brain Workout, which I'm up to about week 3 now, former partner and Chief Creative Officer at PwC, Chair of the Australian Film, Television and Radio School, and I guess you've hosted a few shows, but most notably Gruen as a panelist, the original panelist, some would say, and the series on Mojo as well. I've got some good little notes here. I just thought, of all the things to ask, do you think probably the peak of your career was doing some advertising commentary on the front bar in particular?
I loved being on the front bar.
Yeah.
Great TV show, right? Awesome TV show. So it's definitely a highlight. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I deliberately wore a T-shirt onto the front bar, which has got this Melbourne logo. It's like a Melbourne heart.
Yeah.
If you can think of the red and blue of the Melbourne jumper, but I've got this logo that, we created. So, and I wore it because I was hoping that it would be commentated on by Mick Malloy or, Anyway.
And they just gave you shit.
Yeah, they just chose to ignore the fact that I had this, I think, rather cool Melbourne T-shirt on.
Yeah.
Hopefully Melbourne supporters that saw the show noticed the T-shirt.
But that's the lovely thing about football, isn't it? Is that it's so important to you, and the story that's associated with it is the fact that we're all born with a heart and it pumps red and blue blood through the different phases. And
exactly.
It's sort of like we're born into all being Melbourne fans, right?
Well, that's very true. So when you do your biology in what used to be called Form 3, so was it year 7? Yeah. So you do there's the cross section of the body. And I just remember the cross section of the body, and of course the oxygenated air is red, and the oxygenated blood is red. And then the blood that's going back towards the heart, of course, is blue. And so when I first saw that illustration, I thought, well, there you go, you see. My heart beats true for the red and the blue it's absolutely universally true. So at one's heart, everyone should be a Demon supporter.
Well, I'm a St Kilda supporter, so I've
perfectly logical, Jordan.
Is that a story that sort of permeated in the group of Melbourne supporters, or something that's been around, or something that you just actually came up with yourself?
No, that's the thing from me.
That's the thing.
Yeah, made perfect sense, Jordan. It still makes sense to me, actually.
It was interesting looking at your childhood. There's some good notes here and there. Born in Mortlake, famous for the square pie. Moved to Glen Iris, East Malvern. I was curious, what was sort of your earliest memory as a kid?
Well, I don't really remember Glen Iris that well. Barina Road is where we lived in Glen Iris.
Oh, yeah.
But I absolutely have got very fond memories of living in East Malvern. Central Park was a big part of my life, and the Harold Holt swimming pool were major parts. I went to Gardner Central State School, which is actually no longer there. When Kennett became the Premier and he shut quite a few of the primary schools, that was one of the schools that was shut. So
Really?
I can't show my kids where I went to primary school, not that they care, but it was just around the corner from Harold Holt.
Yeah.
And Harold Holt, I was in the swimming squad at Harold Holt, played cricket for Gardner, which became Gardner Ewing, won some premierships there, played footy for the East Melbourne Royal Blues. We are the Royal Blues, sung to the Carlton Footy Club song. I had a great, Malvern childhood.
Do you, were there any lessons, I guess, that you learned from your parents directly or indirectly at all that you sort of still hold true today?
That's a really good question. So the cricket team for Gardner Ewing, it was made up of it was Greeks, Italians, Polish.
Oh, yeah.
There was Wisbicki, there was Lebecki, there was Deplaris, there was also some Anglo names. So we had an 11. So look, this is mid-70s I'm talking about. We had an 11, which was a wonderful mixed match of what was New Australia then. And I always, I don't know how to describe this, but everyone was equal. Everyone was equal. And that's a pretty important lesson, isn't it?
Yeah.
That was driven pretty hard, actually.
So this is in East Malvern back then?
Yeah, East Malvern.
Really? Interesting. Because it's not not the area I would have assumed that you'd have a lot of Greeks and Italians. I mean, my family is half Greek, half Australian. Yeah. And the assumption is that when you came here, you had the option and you went to Carlton
yes.
area.
Yeah,
and then
you had the option and you went to Carlton.
Yeah, and then you migrated northwest, or like my grandfather, you could come to St Kilda, and then you sort of end up migrating towards the southeastern suburbs. And the most popular one now, obviously, is Oakley, Bentley. I grew up in Bentley, Moorabbin. That's probably why that St Kilda support was reaffirmed. Well,
yeah, but also Bentley is quite a bit of a Melbourne stronghold. Bentley,
yeah.
There's a pocket of Bentley which is actually quite hardcore Melbourne.
Oh yeah, Bentley
Demons. Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
I know you're right when you say that, Jordan. So why did we have such a mix of people in Malvern? I don't know the answer to that, but we did, and I remember the side very fondly. We were a very good cricket side, and the coach was a fellow called Peter Wood, and then Peter Wood went on to be a teacher at Melbourne High School, and about 6 or 7 years ago, I was contacted by Peter Wood. So I hadn't seen him since I was a teenager, early teen years, and he said, I'm a teacher at Melbourne High, as you know, Russ, it'd be great if you came and spoke to the boys. So I had a fantastic time, really loved going to the assembly at Melbourne High. I don't know whether you've been to the assembly hall there, Jordan, but it is awesome. It is an awesome assembly hall. And the energy at Melbourne High was really wonderful. And I got to see Peter, who I haven't seen him since, but I hadn't seen him for, 30 years plus. It was great.
Well, that must be, and this is where we can sort of get into your early career, that must be one of the nice parts of being a known figure in media, when people pull on you for those selfless requests rather than the selfish requests. I can imagine that would be quite nice.
Well, one of the great things about being on the telly is people that have been a part of your life do make contact with you. And so if I wasn't on the telly, it'd be very unlikely that Peter Wood would have tracked me down and got me to come and speak at Melbourne High. So it is a joy. And, yeah, people reach out all the time. People that you were connected with from a very young age. And, yeah, I like it. And, I'm someone that quite happily talks to strangers as much as people that have known me in the past. So it's all good.
You started at Gardner Central State School, then Scotch, and sort of after you got over this idea of becoming a footballer, you took a job as
everyone's fantasy. Every Melburnian's fantasy.
Well, I just read this bit about Robbie Flower supposedly anointing you into football greatness at some point in your life. I can't remember where I read it, but anyway, so you've got this lowly account manager job at McCann. What's I know after that, obviously, you went on to running. I mean, if you look at your LinkedIn, you'd think you jumped from account manager to CEO at Y&R, but I'm sure there's somewhere in between all that. And then obviously PwC.
I'm not very good at writing CVs. No good.
I mean, you don't really need to, do you? But I guess I was more intrigued. Why advertising? Like, what was the prompt to get into it?
Well, I didn't really consider it. I hadn't considered any career. I was doing the marketing course at what was Chisholm, which is now Monash.
Oh, yeah.
So I did the degree there. But prior to finishing the degree, my father organised a week's work experience at McCann Erickson.
Oh, okay.
Because he had mates that were there. He'd done some work with them. My father actually got into the ad business when he was 45.
Really?
Yeah. So, and he probably knew his son well enough to think that Russell would probably enjoy this. Anyway, so I had a week's work experience. At the end of the week, on the Friday, a fellow called David Chalk, who is well known as a very good thinker and researcher in the advertising world. He was head of planning at McCann, and he got me to present an idea that I'd had to L'Oreal, which was a client of McCann's. So when I reflect on that, I don't know what the idea was, but it must have been half decent. Otherwise, he wouldn't have, got me to front up to as the work experience guy. Anyway, so at the end of the week, they said, "We'd like you to stay. Can you, please be an account executive on the Holden business?" So I was earning money.
Back in the 70s as well.
Oh no, this is 80s.
87.
Yeah, so this is in the 80s, 87. That's right. And so, look, I was working full time and doing a degree full time. Completed the degree whilst being at McCann Erickson as an account guy, and I got to work. For example, I got to work with a bloke called Ted Horton, who was the creative director at McCann's at the time. Who, of course, is two things: is an unbelievable advertising entrepreneur, into Big Red, but importantly, is to this day one of my great friends.
Yeah. Isn't Tim Horton also in...
Ted Horton.
Ted Horton. Isn't he also in the copybook? Is he one of the people that wrote in the copybook that every creative director seems to have on their desk?
If he isn't in the book, I'd be surprised, but I can't confirm one way or the other. He is... Ted Horton, I mean, I say this half trying to be funny, but also half serious. If he was in England, he would be knighted. He has had an amazingly successful advertising career, including writing election-winning campaigns. That's the reason why I say he'd be knighted, because if you write election-winning campaigns in Britain, you end up getting knighted, right? So we're here, no one cares.
Yeah.
but there they care.
I'm pretty sure that he was potentially either included in the book or referenced by one of the 2 or 3 Australians that are in that book.
Yes,
it's predominantly English that are in the book, but it's a great read. I've come to the industry quite late in the last few years, and it's nice reading these books, knowing all the people I'm working with now have gone through that early learning stage being recommended them.
Well, Jordan, it's fantastic that you are reading the books. That's my view, a big part of doing well in the advertising business is understanding the history of the advertising business and getting really, really deep into the talent, why they were talented, what their perspective was, learning about the joy of the right typeface, the right photographer, the right director, where good ideas come from, the strategic side of it as well, the stories, agency stories. It's a beautiful industry to really get deeply engaged in.
Will said this in your Willosophy episode that if there's one panelist that the show couldn't live without, it would be you. And I'd probably agree because, and that was the thing I noticed on the front bar, is you were so passionate about these ads. You were more passionate about the story behind the ad, and they just wanted it for the bit. They just wanted to make the gag about the ad or the jingle that was in it. But you could tell you wanted to go through and tell the whole history of the ad, and I guess I was. I
just wanted
realized,
to shut me up.
yeah, they just wanted to shut you up and move you on and bag
Yeah.
you about your T-shirt. But look, I have fond memories as a kid watching ads. I've always been intrigued in stories. I don't know what it was. I think it was maybe the fact that at a big Greek family table, it would be the hushness that would come over the table from telling a story.
Yep.
My grandpa taped pretty much everything on VHS. So I watched like Fawlty Towers, all the Disney movies, but he always taped the ads. He didn't actually pause the ads. And so I was just going through some of them before, like the old Snappy Tom ads, some of the first cartoon-based Snappy Tom ads, the jingle's still in my head. The very first John West ad where the man is fighting the bear. It's probably from the 80s, actually.
Well, that's not the very first John West ad.
That whole theme.
That's your earliest John West memory. It was actually fantastic, wasn't it?
It was a very, very good ad.
And it's what's so interesting about advertisers is they occasionally do very well because they do something that cuts through, that's funny, that's interesting, people have never seen before, like that commercial. And yet they don't try and do it again. It's so bizarre. Michaelides is actually quite a famous advertising name in London.
Is it really?
I'm trying to think of there was an agency that had Michaelides in its name. I think he was an art director. That's
interesting because Michaelides is sort of anything with Edes on it makes sense. I mean, it's in London, Greek Cypriots. Name. So part of the UK, they probably would have it was either London or Melbourne that you had the choice of going to.
Yes,
my grandpa was given the option. So it would make sense. But Edes is just means son of. So it just meant that guy's dad was named Michael.
So is it right that a lot of Greeks did come to Melbourne because Melbourne is the same distance below the Tropic of Cancer, Capricorn, as Athens is above?
I don't think so. I think the only thing that guided a lot of Greek migrants every time we're actually doing a piece at the moment on the story of my grandpa because he published the first. Do you know the Neos Cosmos?
No.
Sort of the first Greek newspaper here in Australia,
okay.
And then the first Sunday
I know Il Globo. Il Globo was Il Globo was the Greek newspaper.
Well, Neos Cosmos still exists today.
Huh?
And so he published that, and then he did the first Sunday newspaper. But he told us that basically they chose the cities that just needed people.
Oh yeah.
That was it. And so because in Greece they had in Cyprus at least they had good, like he went to an English college, so he could speak English.
Yeah.
And then it was as simple as you go to London or Melbourne. And that was it.
Get your ruler out, and I'll make a bet with you.
What?
that Melbourne's distance is the same from the Tropic of Capricorn as Athens is from the Tropic of Cancer.
Well,
and that would have contributed to the decision because people would have said, "Oh, the weather must be the same."
Do you think people were wise enough back then though to make that decision?
I think that probably a lot of them would argue that they were wiser.
Yeah, I know my grandpa would. Going back to that story of the VHS tapes, was there any stories or anything in particular that you really grew up on and that's what made you love stories? Or the idea of telling the story?
It's more about ideas. I think it's more... so my father was busy in business, but he was also a pretty good artist, and he was a cartoonist. And he would do cartoons for a newspaper that was called Stock. It still exists, actually, called Stock and Land. It's the regional weekly newspaper for Australia. And he had a character called Sam the Ram.
Uh-huh.
And Sam the Ram would, of course, really tax every single week. You have to think of a new cartoon. So he would get me into his office and show me a number of options. And this is from a very, very young age. He'd say, "What do you think of this one, Russ? What about this one? What about this one?" So I suppose, the story I tell myself, which does make sense, I think, was that from very early days, I was having conversations about ideas and what ideas resonate. And I think that's always been of great interest to me. It's also interesting. He had his uncle Wilbur Howcroft. He was a prolific author of rural stories. In fact, if I just went on the other side of my desk, I could just show you a whole pile of books that were written by Wilbur, and also by my father. He wrote books. Then on my grandmother's father, he wrote his life story. He died at 99, and his life story is actually pretty interesting. It's a very interesting, 19th century story. So I suppose I was surrounded by story. There was a thing in my household that people like to tell stories and write them down. I don't think any of us are particularly good at it, but there's a desire to tell stories
or passion.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Who do you think you're most like when it comes to a parent or grandparent, particularly when people tell stories about them?
Well, my mother's father had a massive effect on me. Yeah, he put a lot of time and effort into me, and he was a very great friend, and I think of him every single day, actually. So he had a significant effect on me, and there's no doubt my mother, in terms of her personality, my mother's a very, very friendly person. She speaks to strangers as well. and Dad was very creative person, so I don't know, like we're all a mix, right?
Yeah, we're definitely all a remix, as Dan Monheit would say. Adman to operator, I think it was interesting looking at your history. Obviously, I was talking about Countsman, there's Brandhouse, YNR. There's obviously some years in between that, but I was curious as to how Gruen came about, or how the opportunity to start to become a broadcaster came about.
Well, what a massive sliding door moment that is, right? So, so I was on the radio with Virginia Trioli. So every second week I'd be on ABC radio. I shared it with Harold Mitchell. Harold would do one Monday, then I'd do the following Monday, then he'd do the next one. So I was just on ABC talking about ads with Virginia, which interestingly was quite revolutionary because the ABC doesn't like to say things like Coca-Cola, right? So, and I loved going on the ABC radio and talking about ads. I thought it was sort of a bit subversive, right? And anyway, Andrew Denton, John Casimir, Anita Jacoby, they were working on an idea, and they had heard me on the radio. And as a result, I was invited to not a pilot, whatever happens before the pilot, like a rehearsal.
Like a testing.
A test, thank you.
Screen testing.
Screen testing.
Yeah.
And so I flew up on a weekend. Will Anderson was sitting where Will sits now. They put me in a seat, which is pretty much where I've been sitting ever since. And they said, just talk about ads.
Yeah. I can't explain it. It was probably, look, it's probably the favourite show for a lot of people, but for me, it was undoubtedly my favourite show.
Good.
Growing up.
Well, when it was quite fun, and then Todd, of course, was he's original, and I'm original with Will, and it was quite fun when I received a phone call from one of the trade press about, and so what do you think about Todd Sampson being on there with you? And my response was, who the fuck is he? Which I've sort of always enjoyed. Todd and I have had a good laugh about that over the years.
Yeah, I bet he absolutely loves that.
Who the fuck's he?
Yeah. It's interesting looking at I always found it interesting watching the show and getting the sense like Will did like to pick on you a bit because you were the suit, so to speak, whereas Todd was sort of the wiry-haired creative, at least if you just looked at people's exteriors, not got to know them. And obviously the two of you became...
Sorry, he sits on the left of the screen and he's wearing a T-shirt, and I sit on the right of the screen and I've got a suit on. It's seriously.
But it is good to see that you and Will have become such good mates, and that could flourish from that. I mean, he was saying that he's the man he likes to talk to the most, that he disagrees with the most. Yeah. I'm curious, what have you learnt from Will?
Well, he's a deep thinker, Jordan. Yeah. His comedy comes from a very deep, well thought through philosophical place, actually. He's a beautiful storyteller, talking about stories before. He is an incredible story. So ever since I've known Will, I've gone to his Melbourne Comedy Festival show every year since then. He has an hour, he stands on stage, and he always tells a beautiful story. He's incredible at it. And as you know, the following that he has is very deep and very passionate. People really do connect with who and what he is. He is something of a revolutionary, let's call him that. There are significant social changes going on in Australia right now, and I think that he is, in a lot of cases, he's in the sweet spot of where society's shifting. He wouldn't even see himself like that, I'm sure, but I certainly do. I think he's got a really strong voice. He's very progressive, very socially progressive. I would argue that I am as well. I'm not. The disagreement bit is, sure, we'll disagree on the importance of capitalism, maybe.
Yeah. Or that ads are a good thing.
Well, of course they are, Jordan. And,
but he very obviously has this chip on his shoulder against the industry, which is what makes it better.
Yeah, I the way I like to describe it is that Gruen, there is a persona for Gruen, and the persona for Gruen, of course, is Gruen, and he's the spine of the show, and the spine of the show absolutely has to be critical. And it must be, where appropriate, cynical. That's a good thing. And those of us in advertising need to explain ourselves. Again, that's why I said yes all those years ago, was because I saw it as an opportunity to explain what this thing is about. It was criticised quite heavily back when it launched. This idea that advertising people were revealing secrets. I mean, what the hell is that? There are no secrets. Advertising is actually the most honest part of communication, because it's very clearly, an ad very clearly reveals itself. Right? It says, "Dear consumer, I'm an ad. I'd like you to buy what it is I'm trying to sell."
Yeah.
There's nothing covert about it. There's plenty of other messaging that's covert.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would definitely agree with that. I want to just jump back to one thing that after Gruen, what I was intrigued about was, you would have had these years doing Gruen, and then opportunities appear over time. So there was obviously Mojo. There's obviously opportunities here and there to be on TV. We spoke before just about the front bar. Mm-hmm. When did it start to sort of crystallize in your head that maybe for the next part of your career, this was going to be where you'd focus? And I'm particularly thinking about like 3AW, because, you've sort of at a position now where you've not so much pushed away from Adland. You've just got more of an advisory role to Adland, and most of what you do is broadcasting.
Yes.
So I was intrigued. When was sort of that moment when you realized that maybe there's more scale here, maybe it's more interesting? When was that exactly?
That's a good question, Jordan. I think I just know myself, and as time goes on, action and talking can be divorced. So, my former colleague and partner at PwC, Justin Paps, I I used to say, well, if it wasn't for Justin, we literally would be all talk and no action.
Yeah.
So I enjoy talking. And so the opportunity to do that for a living is something that obviously I felt, wow, that is an incredible opportunity. It's also the number one show in town, and it's been the number one show for more than 20 years. So, you're doing it in a mainstream sense. So that's a pretty attractive proposition. And you're working with, I now work with a man called Ross Stevenson. And if the listeners haven't tuned into 3AW Breakfast, give it a go, because in Ross Stevenson, you are literally witnessing, and I'll call him an artist, Jordan. He is an unbelievably creative human being, and the show unfolds in front of, I get to sit opposite him, right? It unfolds in front of my eyes. I've worked with a lot of really powerful creative people, and he is more than right up there.
Right.
So it's exciting. It's exciting to watch and participate in creativity every single day. Radio, live radio, it's very disposable. It's a different sort of idea. So advertising ideas are really tough because they're not disposable. You have to really prosecute the idea. Then clients invest in the idea. Then they have to invest in the idea running, right? So there's nothing disposable about advertising. Talkback radio, 24/7. The 3 hours that I get to enjoy Monday to Friday is entirely disposable creativity, right? So there's a painting that's painted every day, and then you do it again the next day.
Yeah, and you've got to be quick-witted and on the fly, more so than well thought out, let's say, with TV or standard TV.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know. There are certainly plenty of people that are far faster and wittier than I am. So
how did it come about?
Well, I got a phone call.
So they just gave you a bell, like, okay, what are you up to? What are you thinking about doing for the next 5 years? Yeah,
I got a phone call, and look, it's interesting because I certainly wasn't looking to do anything else. PwC is a fantastic organisation, and the work I was doing there, I absolutely adored. PwC has got a core purpose, which is building trust in society and solving important problems. And literally, that's what they do every day. I mean, what you think PwC is and what it actually is are two different things. So I wasn't looking to do something else. But when an opportunity like that arrives, it's pretty hard to say. Certainly, your heart immediately says yes, and then your head freaks out.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when you get to this stage in your life where money is not an issue, where kids is not the focus, where time is not an issue, and then someone approaches you with a type of medium you've never probably tried as much before, or make it more regular, and to do it in breakfast, that's the interesting part, because breakfast you'd probably argue is the peak time. I mean, look, it
is the peak time.
When I had a car, living in the CBD, I don't really need a car these days. I'm more used to getting Ubers and whatnot around, but I used to listen to a bit of 1116 SEN, 3AW, on top of whatever else, mainly because I liked the conversations. But my father-in-law is a big fan of 3AW. So every time we're staying down at Martha Cove, you can be assured that about 7 or 8 a.m., 3AW is on blaring loud.
Good father-in-law. Well, the rumour file, which is on
the rumour file,
6 or 7 minutes past 7, that is amazing. Right? Yeah. So, calling for rumours, people ring up, and when Ross says, the telephone is full, it's full. People and you just think about that, Jordan, every single day, times 5 for the week, times 52 for the year, are ringing up with rumours, and many of them finish up being part of Neil Mitchell's show, which finish up being in the evening news, which finish up being in the newspaper the next day. So it's extraordinary to be in amongst it all.
Yeah. Do you, if you look back on, I guess, your career now in agency land, I found this very interesting just chatting to people like Dan Monheit. It's been really obvious reading Mumbrella that because of COVID, things have changed massively.
Yep.
Whether that means your classic Big Four agencies are changing, whether it means that people will opt for more specialized agencies or more widely distributed agencies, I don't know. I'm just sort of along for the ride at the moment and seeing where things go. But if you were given the next 90 days to begin again and you were 30, what would you do? How would you start?
I would absolutely find a way and find a place that is long on technology and big on ideas. So there's no question that the use of, let's call it brand technology, is the future. And how does one industrialize ideas? The problem when I say that is that people will say, he sort of doesn't care about the ad world anymore. And I fundamentally care about the ad world. And I love good, big, super ideas. So how do you sort of there's a tension there. You need to create beautiful, big ideas, but you also need to be able to industrialize them and get them out across many platforms as efficiently and as quickly as you possibly can. It's quite interesting when you have conversations with agency people. You say, if you were a client, would you want the job to be done faster, cheaper, better? And it's pretty hard to say no, right? Because, of course, clients want that. And if you say, if you were a client, and let's say you've got $1 million, how much of that million would you want to spend in media, in working media, right? And the answer is as much as possible.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's the bit that gets exposed to the consumer. And yet the ad world, I think that's really simple. I think it's really obvious. And yet the ad world doesn't really want to think that one through.
Well, because, if you've got a business that's been around for 20 years with the same corporate structure, it's really hard.
That's right.
You just got to read The Innovator's Solution. It's basically impossible for those type of businesses to move their business model. You either have to start a totally separate organization that begins afresh and you finance, or you're bound for failure in the long run.
Yeah, I agree. I think in the end, clients will buy what they want to buy. And clients have got many, many, many options. Yeah, so lucky them. There's a suite of, they can have a mix of, they can have the big and the traditional, but then they might just have a little hot shop that gives them a handle on the way. As I say, all the power's in their hands, really. So it's up to the marketplace to provide different offerings, I should say. Hopefully, clients pay people well. That's a big part, I think, of the difficulty in the business. How do agencies be genuinely paid for the value that they create? That's a really tough one. How do you not be paid on time? If cracking that nut has been very, very difficult, Jordan, but someone somewhere will crack that nut, and and hopefully they make enormous amounts of money. It's very interesting, just for fun. Google the chateau that David Ogilvy owned in the last third of his life. Chateau Tufu, I think, is what it's called. And you'll see the sort of wealth that advertising people were able to make in the past. Incredible, because they were getting media commissions, right? That's the main reason.
Yeah, that was a big element. Is media was the way the media was priced and dealt and bought was totally different.
Well, the commission was really like a de facto royalty for the idea. Yeah, so if you created an idea that was actually creating value for clients, every time that idea ran, you got 10% of the price of it running. So in effect, it was a royalty. No one ever saw it as a royalty, but that actually was what it was. And there was actually a nice purity to it as well, because if the ad was working, the client would spend more money. And as a result of the client spending more money, the agency received more money off the back of the commission or the royalty. So there was a beautiful flywheel there. And also, if you go back to David Ogilvy's time, that's when, mass media, mass consumerism actually was created post-war. So all of a sudden, you've got freeways, you've got trucks, you've got supermarkets, you've got white goods, you've got brown goods, you've got packaged goods, and then you've got the telly, right? So all of a sudden, you had this insane, Google-esque growth.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting because we've looked at, when it comes to media, I think the only way to harness the value that's accrued in media these days is to actually become an investor in media, whether that's buying shares in Facebook or Google or creating your own media assets.
Yes.
And the creative side of things, I think you're right. I think that industrial element is what will be key. Essentially, I've noticed a lot of productizing of things happening amongst services, probably in the last few years. And I think we do a bit of that. And I think it's sort of obvious that things are going to go in that direction. So yeah.
And the other critical element in all of this is helping clients with their decision making. So, media mix is a really obvious one. How much do I put it, let's call it the top of the funnel versus the bottom of the funnel versus mid funnel? Like, what's the right amount of money? How much money should I be spending? You'll be interested to know, Jordan, that a big part of what we were doing at PwC, CMO Advisory, was advising clients on the sort of budgets they should have. And a lot of the time we were saying they should be bigger. So that was interesting because not a lot of consultants have got the reputation that what they're doing is helping clients spend more money. But that was absolutely our perspective. It's interested me since 1987 that you say to a client, is your advertising working? And they say, yes. So then you say, so why have you stopped advertising? It is illogical.
Why do you think they do that?
A lot of the reason is that they have a cap on a budget. They shouldn't have a cap on a budget, right? Just spend a percentage of sales, and as the sales go up, just keep spending more money, right? So they complicate things a lot of the time. Also, there's one of the other interesting dynamics, I think, is that the industry over a long period of time would burst activity. So let's say just a client's got $1 million and the agency would persuade the client to spend that $1 million in one burst of activity. Byron Sharp will tell you that that's not a smart way to spend that $1 million.
Yeah.
His argument would be get the $1 million, divide it by 12 and spend that much every month, right? And that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Just noodle your way into the everyday consumption of media that the consumer is consuming, and you're highly likely to get that purchase at the time that they're in the marketplace. If you just have a burst of activity over 1 month, well, 3 or 4 months down the track, well, you're not going to be top of mind.
Consistency is key.
Logical, right? It's logical, and
I think that goes to sort of corporate structures, right, and goes back to that idea of your annual budget, and the weird dynamics you get between the agency and the company that's got this budget. It
is weird, right?
It is weird.
Yeah, because the marketing services provider is there to help the client succeed. That's it.
But they're also there to make money.
Of course they're there to make money. And this is where it gets difficult because some of the time you don't feel like the client wants you to make money. Right? So there is a very powerful word in business though, Jordan, as you know, and the word is no.
Probably the most common word too.
Well, when the client says, we want to give you the business and we're going to pay you 50 grand, if you need 150 to run it, there's only one answer. Yeah, and it's hard. I've been there. It is incredibly difficult because the ad world is a highly competitive world.
Yeah, it's brutal.
And that competition, of course, provides great opportunities for clients.
There was something raised in Will's interview, which is sort of intertwined with the question about leaders and mojo. But I want to start with this first component. So, I mean, it's quite obvious to me that you were a big fan of Alan Morris and Alan Johnson. So they created Mojo, as we know, as you and I know, rather, but for the audience, they created an agency that really came up with some jingles and ideas, probably in the predominantly in the 80s, you'd probably say, that really changed the way products were marketed, but also they started to think about how Australia was marketed, which sort of lends to a snippet that you and Will had about the state of Australia, and something that with the right guest I always like to get into, because some people think about it, some people just don't give a shit.
Right.
And, I feel like you really hit the nail on the head with this idea of the magic of Australia. I remember watching a doco a year or two ago called The Magical Land of Oz.
Right.
And I've always thought Australia is this really bizarre place. I mean, the black swan principle in the world of finance literally came from the idea that there was no such thing as black swans.
And there they are.
And here they are in Perth in WA. How would you start to change? Let's just say overnight, for whatever reason, you were made PM, and you've got about 6 to 12 months to start thinking about how you'd start to shape your policy,
right,
and the future of Australia. What would that actually look like?
Jeez, Jordan. Well, okay, so let's just talk about brand Australia. Yeah, so what I would absolutely do is, and I genuinely would do this, is triple my global advertising budget, and I would have the proposition around magic, and I would take to the world the idea that Australia is a magic place. And it's a magic place, as you said, the magical creatures. So there's a flora and fauna reason why it's magical. So there's a reality to that. There's also, of course, our culture and First Nations culture. There is the innovations that we have done, which makes us quite magical, actually, like incredible innovations that we forget about. The lifestyle that we have, magical. Right? So you can actually attach that magic word to who and what we are. Nothing like having a single word that you can attach to your country. So New Zealand's done pretty well out of pure. So I think we could do very well out of magic. I have fun sometimes saying that we should use deadly because, of course, in Indigenous culture, deadly is actually really good, as you know.
Yeah.
Right? So how was your day? Deadly. That means it was good. So you could have fun with that, but I suspect that
the Americans won't get it.
Yeah, even if you were the boss, even if you were the prime minister, you probably wouldn't agree to doing deadly.
Yeah. Well, I always say that you've got to sort of dumb it down enough so the Americans will get it. It's got to be very simple. Yeah,
no, Americans are very sophisticated, Jordan, and they did get us on the moon in the 60s.
I just love shit stirring.
Yeah. So I would build a proposition around magic, but I would spend the right amount of money because if you get that right, you're going to make it back tenfold because it's going to be. Yes, it will affect tourism, but it will also affect trade. If you do it right, you might even get. I think there's 1 million expats out there in the world. Many of them are very smart, very successful. If you do it right, you might even get some of them back. Presumably, a number of them are thinking about coming back now because Australia's looking pretty good. Look at our our decline in GDP is nothing like other parts of the world. It's been pretty amazing. Yeah. So I would celebrate our country much more than we do. I would I would change the flag. I would make the next Governor-General a Indigenous female leader.
What about the idea of...
Build some more airports.
Yeah, that would be handy.
More trains. I would make us a leading country in the development of new energy sources. Yeah, there'd be lots of exciting things you could do, Jordan. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, I do think, though, that there's something mental about it as well in terms of the idea of becoming a republic. I'm not saying that has to be the defining moment that will change things, but there's a angst in society about who we are at the moment. And there's a lot of elements to that, like whether it's over-reliance on China economically or over-reliance on the US militarily. There's a bunch of things that I feel that we could do that could change our mentality on who we are.
Yeah, well, let me sell you. I was always a hardcore Republican, paid-up member, but I'm not anymore. And the reason why I'm not anymore is I think it's more important that we have an Indigenous female as the Governor-General.
Why?
And that's easy to do because the Constitution exists that allows that to happen. Like, there's nothing that gets in the way. Unless the Indigenous leaders don't want to do it, right? So that's a discussion that needs to be had by someone somewhere. I think that would go to a huge way to healing us. And there's also great logic in it. So when, let's just say there's a dignitary that is arriving on the tarmac and they walk down the stairs, of course they need to be welcomed to country. Now, it makes a lot of sense that they're welcomed to country by an Indigenous leader who's the Governor-General. I think there's an opportunity for us to get connected to that person as well. Like, we're not connected to the Governor-General. The Governor-General tends to be white and male, not always, but often military as well. It just seems to me to be a nice idea. And as I said, it's easy to do. Yeah, being a republic is not easy, as we've discovered. It is simply not easy. And
it's actually more expensive, which is an interesting point.
And then who would be the president? It's highly unlikely that the president would be an Indigenous female leader. And then the other thing, which I think is very interesting, which doesn't get talked about much now, Brexit is very important for Australia. Yes. And what will happen is the traditional Commonwealth countries will start trading more than they have in the past, I think, because Britain is, changing its orientation. So that's good for us. I've always been interested in the Commonwealth. Just think about that word. It's a really powerful word, right? We're in the business of Commonwealth. So the Indians, the Canadians, the Australians, the New Zealanders, the South Africans, the Brits, and many, many others, of course, all have a common interest in their own development and, job creation, wealth creation, etc. So I wouldn't be surprised at all, Jordan, if actually the Commonwealth starts to become far more important than we give it credit for.
Well, I don't know if you've read much about Kanzik, but that's become a real thing, the idea of a free trade, free movement agreement between Canada, UK, New Zealand. Basically, they want to extend what Australia and New Zealand currently have.
Except I've still got to use a passport when I go to New Zealand, which is just nonsense. Anyway, no, I've got to go through international, controls.
Yeah.
Yes, we should do it. Imagine if the Indians, the Canadians, the New Zealanders, the South Africans, Australians, Brits all use the same currency.
Yeah.
That'd be pretty full on.
I feel like you're going to run into a roadblock though with the Brits.
Yeah, I know that's not going to happen. I'm just chucking it out there. Right?
COVID has been interesting, which I think has sort of accelerated these ideas anyway. You were on obviously the podcast with Alex, and one of the things you were talking about is how it sort of accelerated things that were already happening. which I think a lot of people have felt, but particularly things in AdLam, which probably permeates to corporate culture, which is working from home, everything being a little bit more remote in the way that we do things, particularly with client-related obligations.
Mm-hmm.
Does the office become more like a clubhouse, particularly for creatives? So I was just curious. Now, I think that interview was a few months ago, maybe even 6 months ago. What's your sense on what the next 6 to 12 months looks like?
Well, let's hope that it looks better. Well, we obviously have to live with COVID, and we have to find a way to do that. We have to, as quickly as we can, get rid of this idea of shutting down borders.
No.
The only way to do that, of course, is to have a really strong hotspot strategy. I fear that the only way that a hotspot strategy works best is the use of digital technologies, which requires us all to opt in to being tracked in effect. And my fear bit around that is that I don't think people will even put it on the agenda, let alone do it.
No.
So I think that's a real pity, because the opportunity to have a green, amber, red system on your phone, it's there. The technology exists. Please. I get it. I get it from a libertarian point of view, but I would argue that the government doesn't have to be doing that. So I'm quite happy to allow, let's say, Google to track me. That's fine. It's a commercial relationship that I have with Google, and that is different to allowing the government to track me. So maybe is there some sort of relationships that can be created with the private sector that allows a better track and trace to happen? I would have thought that is an opportunity. I just don't. That's not going to happen.
It was on that point of track and tracing. I just got to say that we had a previous guest, Jerry Sarkis, who has the biggest app agency in Australia, and that app could have been very, very good. Yeah. It's just that it was designed in a way that was more like a news app. That had no, in terms of consumer psyche, had no way of bringing you back to the platform on a regular basis throughout the day. No push notifications that had any value, no news. I think he said if you had just put the live numbers in the app and pushed people with notifications like that every day, you wouldn't even need to have the opt-in process.
Yeah, right. So there is a progression on the original idea of, we need an app and we need to be able to use digital technology for track and trace. And we've barely sort of dipped the toe in the water, right?
What's the first thing you're going to do when this is all said and done?
I've never really been. I mean, I like going to the pub. I do like going to the pub. I'm not like a massive pub guy, but gee, I'm looking forward to going to the pub. I really, really am. Footy. So maybe it's the pub at the football, of course, with some friends to watch the D's win. I don't know that I've got any bigger ideas than that. That's good enough for me.
I would agree with that. I think for a lot of us St Kilda supporters, for a brief period of about 3-4 weeks, we had this idea that somehow we're going to make the grand final.
No, I think you could.
We could, but wouldn't it have been weird doing it in this moment? Like, I was having this discussion with my dad. Is it the same winning a grand final this year versus any other year? And I just said to him, I don't give a shit. I just want to win the grand final.
No, it is the same this year. They've had to run on the park and they've had to beat the opposition. Absolutely, it's the same, right?
All right, I want to jump into some rapid fire questions to finish things off.
Okay, let's do it.
What does your morning and evening routine look like at the moment?
I get up a little after 4. I jump in the swimming pool because that sort of is a nice way to wake up. Very bracing. I am in a 1-3 cab at 4:20. Mm-hmm. I'm at the office at 4:35. I read the papers. The radio starts at 5:30. 8:30 it's done. 9:15, I'm in a cab. I'm home. I sometimes have a little snooze, but not as often now. And I then sit at my desk. There's lots of other things to do, and that job I've got is like consumption of media is, doing work. So that's good. And talk to family, eat dinner, light dinner these days. I still do quite a lot of exercise. My next appointment is with exercise. Bit of meditation.
Oh, yeah.
And I try and get myself to sleep by 9 o'clock, really, is the plan. And that's not too bad. My family, they've all left school. So it's sort of, I don't know that I'd like doing this job with a young family. I think that'd be very difficult to do.
Yeah, it'd be incredibly hard.
Yeah, right. So no one wants to talk to me at my house anyway. So, I just go to bed.
Are you capping off at the moment with any particular TV show, any movie, any series that you've been watching at all?
False Flag is a cracker on SBS On Demand.
Okay. False Flag.
It's a Israeli show, and it's a ripper. Unfortunately, I've had issues with SBS On Demand the last 48 hours, so I haven't watched the final episodes. But False Flag is very good.
Yeah.
I like watching Parliament, Jordan.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll turn that on.
Do you watch that on ABC iView, or do you just watch it at midday or whenever it's normally on?
So you can sort of see my office here, and then through those doors, underneath the bookshelves is a telly.
You just watch it there.
Yeah.
Just watch Parliament.
Yeah, Parliament, and then I'll set my fire. So just around here, and that way there's a fireplace.
Yeah.
And then a bit further down that way, there's a bar. So I've got a bar, I've got a nice sort of couch area, fireplace, and I've got a reading and telly through there. So it's all good.
You're all done.
I've literally been in those 3 rooms since mid-March. All right.
Last question for you. If you could have a billboard anywhere in Melbourne in particular, where would it be and what would you have on it?
Good question. Geez, I was going to say Tullamarine Freeway, but no one's going to the airport now, are they? Well, right now, billboards aren't great, right?
No, they're not. All you have to do is look at the O Media report.
So what I wouldn't do is if you don't mind, I wouldn't have a billboard. What I would do is I would get that old-fashioned aeroplane that would drag the billboard behind the aeroplane.
Banner. Yeah.
Because that way we can get all of Melbourne seeing it. So we're not relying on someone to drive past a billboard because that's unlikely. So we need to have that aeroplane with the banner. Mm-hmm. And then on the banner, we need a message of energy, don't we? And we need maybe a combination of be kind and spend money. They are the 2 most important things that we need to get into Melbourne as fast as we... Well, in fact, I think we are. In the main, we are a very kind city. But let's just remind ourselves that being kind is important. But, geez, we need to get the money go around happening as fast as we possibly can. So be kind, spend money.
It's very hard when people have been scared about what's been going on because there is that buying power still there. It's just they were saying that they've been talking a lot about in the UK. Obviously, when you go and tell people that they need to bunker down and then you come out a few months later and say, no, you need to go out and spend money, it's very hard to change that opinion.
It's interesting, isn't it? Have you seen have you heard that term, the velocity of money?
Yes, but in what context are you referring?
Well, just the speed with which a dollar bill goes around the economy. Right. And obviously the quicker it goes around, the more growth you've got. Yeah. So, clearly the velocity of money right now, certainly in Melbourne, Victoria, is not there. Although there's a lot of packages that arrive at the household, isn't there?
Yeah, I can speak from my own experience. We're getting a lot at the moment.
Which is
unusual.
sort of fun.
I'm going to ask, just with this bookshelf, because I'm very envious. I've got, you probably can't see it on my side, but I've got a big bookshelf here because I read for about an hour every night to sort of relax and go to sleep. If you could pick one book in particular, what sort of stands out to you? And I'll give my example at the moment, and it'll probably be Homo Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. Yeah. Probably one of the best books I've ever read, simply just because the way he looks at us as a group, as a species.
Well, in fact, it's an awesome book for people that work in the world of brand, because Homo Sapiens is all about. Actually, I think you can boil it down to the difference between us and the rest is that we know how to tell stories, and that's obviously about brands, right? So I agree with you. Awesome book. Sapiens is also very good, and 21 Lessons for the 21st Century.
Okay.
Also,
I've read that yet.
It's by Yuval.
Yeah.
And get on YouTube, watch him as well. That's very, very good. And right now, I am actually reading Malcolm Turnbull's book.
Okay. What did you think?
It is excellent. What I find so interesting about it is the man is a freak. Unbelievably clever, insane achiever, very significant thinker, and yet do we actually acknowledge that and appreciate that? It's just like he did actually become the Prime Minister, right?
Yeah, he did.
That's quite hard to do, right?
He did. I mean, he was obviously very gifted and very smart. I guess I was a fan of Malcolm. I was just a bit disappointed with what sort of eventuated of his prime ministership. Yeah, but part of that is politics, isn't it?
Yeah. So the idea that politics is binary is nonsense. It is. It's you're in the grey.
It's very grey.
Yeah, of course it is. You know, the notion of right and wrong is pretty tough, and a lot of people sort of seem to think that it is as simple as that. It's just not.
Yeah. I think it's on my reading list. I've got about a couple grand worth of books though on that reading list. I have to be very, very particular about what I buy. I used to buy them in bulk of 70 books at a time and read through them in a year.
Jeez, okay.
Now I just sort of I just buy what I need right now. Otherwise, you read stuff, and I've read some things, and I've picked it up and started to read it and gone, why do I need to read this? This book's crap.
Yeah.
So I can get very, very addictive with Amazon wishlist. Russell, thank you so much for doing this.
No problem.
This interview and probably Will's interview was very good for me personally, just having watched the show growing up. So thank you for accepting, and thanks for coming on. And where can people find you on the interwebs?
So LinkedIn, I use LinkedIn quite a lot. So just search my name; they can see me there. Twitter handles Howcroft, although probably Ross and John 3AW is what we should do these days, Jordan.
Link to Ross and John.
Yeah, and look, and that'll be, I'm into week 5 of that show, of the radio show. So how we use social media and how we market the show is certainly a next stage for me. I'm just learning how to do the 3 hours at this stage.
Fair enough. I would have put you down for a Twitter guy.
Oh yeah. So at Howcroft is Twitter.
Yeah.
Twitter sometimes,
it's I'm not the biggest fan of it these days.
Well, I think that I genuinely think that Twitter can, I'm sure, amongst many, trigger some serious mental health issues, and that's not a good thing.
No, and we could get into that for hours, but thank you very much for coming on. I love the background with the bird and the flowers and the art.
So that's called a bloke. That's the florist down in Swan Street.
Okay.
Next door at the Cheeky Monkey coffee shop there.
Oh yeah, it's not far from where we are.
Yeah, I walk into him, see him, and say, I want a bloke's bunch. So that's a bloke's bunch. It's just natives.
What's the bird?
That was given to me by Thinkerbird. That was my gift for the radio show, and that is. They said something like, rather than give you an alarm clock, we thought we'd give you a black cock.
I do like
something like that.
Yeah, I do like that.
So that's from Tinkerbell. Yeah,
very nice. Russell, thanks for coming on.
Here's John, good man.
Thank you so much for watching Uncommon and this week's episode. If you like it, smash that like button. If you want to keep up to date with what we're doing, please do subscribe. We would love that. We'd love to build this audience that we're growing here of Uncommoners. If you want to keep up to date with audio, you can search for us on all of your good podcast apps. It's Uncommon or Uncommon Show. We'll typically find us. For social, you want to see behind the scenes this amazing studio that I'm sitting in, just search at Uncommon_show. And everything will be there, including our weekly promos. But look, thanks so much for stopping by. Until next time, thanks for watching.